Welcome to the Bariatric Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kristen Lloyd, mindset mentor, somatic coach, and transformational guide for those on the path to true healing. Whether you've had weight loss surgery or on GLP-1s or simply seeking a new way forward with food and your body, this space is for you. This podcast is a mission to change the narrative, unlearning the patterns that no longer serve you, moving beyond quick fixes into deep, embodied healing, lasting mindset shifts, and true self-leadership. We are healing from the roots, rewiring the mind, regulating the body, and returning home to ourselves. We are here for growth rooted in honesty and self-trust because that, my friends, is the foundation of healing. So grab your cup of joe or your H2O and let's go. Welcome back, everyone. I am Dr. Kristen Lloyd. This is Bariatric Mindset Success Podcast. I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I'm welcoming back Coach Francis, who works with me on my team in Bariatric Mindset and the School of Self-Mastery. And so welcome again for co-hosting with me again today, Francis. We are going to have an amazing time. I know it.
Thank you so much for inviting me back, Kristen. I love working with you and I'm excited to dig deep into the next session.
Oh, yes, girl. This topic is juicy. It's juicy.
Yep.
So we decided that we are going to be focused on vulnerability because that is where the gold is. And we know it. And we have been talking about how when individuals can be vulnerable with themselves, in a group, right? When seeking support, that it can lead to amazing breakthroughs, right? But we've also talked about that there's got to be a point of readiness. And so we were like, we have to hit record. We have to hit record because we were having this fantastic conversation. And I was like, this has to be recorded. And do you have any initial thoughts on vulnerability? Because I have so many juicy tidbits. And I also want to ask, where do you think vulnerability comes in? And I think this is a great starting point. When you first came into the bariatric mindset space, what gave you the courage to be so vulnerable and to dive in to your experience and to share deeply? Because you know it doesn't have to be with us. It could be anywhere. Vulnerability is vulnerability. Sharing, that's what leads to breakthroughs.
Yes, absolutely. So I think that for me, and I've shared this in past conversations we've had, so I do have a 12-step background. So there is this sense of kind of coming to this for me that I knew how to be vulnerable already.
Yeah.
But I want to take that step back because I know that there's a lot of people who don't know how to be vulnerable yet. And it became, for me, way back when I kind of started working on this in groups of people, myself with groups of people, because that started prior to bariatric surgery.
Right.
I had to be able to know that I'm coming to a safe place and know that those that are in this group, whether it be the bariatric mindset group, whether it be 12-step program, whether it be group therapy, are all there for the same purpose, and that is to heal. And I had to get past but if I'm vulnerable, that could be used against me. Oh, if I'm vulnerable, then that's a weapon. So I had to get past those feelings and trust that I'm making the best decision with the information I have on hand, which is being surrounded by people that are there for the common good. I'm not being vulnerable to my mom or to my dad or to my spouse or to my siblings yet. I mean, that may come later on, but I'm being vulnerable to people that are walking the same walk as I am walking. And as long as I kept that kind of in the forefront of my mind, it allowed me to open up in ways I could never have thought to open up.
Right. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking the same thing. that vulnerability can lead to people being, or the fear of vulnerability
Yeah.
can lead to people shutting down, closing off, right? Building walls. And, I love Brene Brown, and I talk about her work, and she talks about vulnerability as courage. It's very important. And what I see people do in the community when dealing with these food issues is almost this beeline or this automatic pattern that they go from, oh gosh, if I share this, it almost like collapses into a pattern of either blame, shame, or guilt. So sometimes vulnerability isn't just sharing with others, it's the vulnerability of self. How do I acknowledge that I'm doing this, that I'm back in this pattern, that I'm in this relationship with food, in this pattern with food, dysfunctional, right? Relationship with food. And it's not about judgment, which we've talked about in other episodes, and we talk about a lot in our community, is how to dispel judgment, release judgment and criticism. And yet that comes from a lot of earlier voices in our lives. And it can be very, very painful, emotionally painful. And so that's where avoidance, I think, comes up. And that avoidance is, well, if I don't have to look at this, if I don't have to acknowledge this, it's almost like we put blinders on, then it's not real. And then that's when I see people months where they've been in an avoidant pattern because it feels safer than to lean into the vulnerability, because that vulnerability may create pain that comes from blame, shame, or guilt. Yet months later, there's a lot of anger of, why did I let it get this far? Or how did I let it get this far? Or what's wrong with me? Or there's a lot of self-talk or even verbalization openly that brings about that shame, blame, or guilt, when really it's about harnessing the courage that vulnerability has the ability to build a bridge. Is, can I maybe forgiveness? I'd love to know your thoughts on this too, and how it shows up in recovery, with especially after relapse, right? With recovery, because we don't, I don't necessarily use those words, relapse, but relapse with food is definitely what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how can I forgive myself? How can I honor this experience, this place, my emotions? And a lot of us are stuck in a punishment cycle because that's what we learned. And that's also maybe key to why vulnerability is difficult, is because we've experienced a pattern of punishment.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't want to sound like a cheerleader for the program that you have, because that's, this is for a broader audience, and I totally get that. But I want to point out that when we become vulnerable in this area of our lives, this arena in our lives, it has to start in a safe place. And if we are going to unsafe places with this vulnerability of food addiction or food issues, with body image issues, if we're going to places that are going to shame us and put us into judgment mode and have us shut down and put up walls, then we are going to the hardware store looking for bread. And so we Yes, right? We have to put ourselves in environments where we feel safe. Going onto social media platforms and airing our life experiences and expecting other people to understand it who aren't where we are is going to set us up for failure. So what we have to do is we have to put ourselves into groups, into communities that understand what we're doing. And it isn't just the post-bariatric surgery arena. It's the post-weight loss arena. I mean, this group of folks, whether it's through GLP-1, whether it's through surgery, even if it's through, diet, there is this mindset shift that happens and needs to continue to happen in order to be successful.
Well, and to move towards lifestyle change, because
absolutely,
there's so much that, and this as well as I do, that that it's not so much like we have. Let me segue for a second, because we have clients who, because of celiac disease, gluten intolerances, I have clients who are on low FODMAP due to gastrointestinal issues. We have clients who are on Whole30 as a result of needing to get away from
processed foods.
Yeah, and more clean eating. And it's funny because we talk about this. We are plan agnostic we are plan agnostic. Like, you come and you do whatever plan works for you. We're here to support the mindset shifts on whatever plan works for you. And that's why it's important, because some people may say, oh, I'm gluten-free. That's the diet that I'm on. So there are some folks that may still use that language. And so when I say we're anti-diet mentality, what I really mean, and what we mean, is we're anti-restriction and deprivation. And there are folks who they recognize it, they know it, they have a food addiction, and which a food addiction is usually largely classified by white flour, white sugar, and highly processed, highly palatable foods. And if anybody has not ever heard of the food addiction scale, feel free to send me an email and I will send one over to you, because it is widely known. I did not create it, but it's out of the food addiction lab from the University of Michigan, the FAST lab. So you can also look at their website. I'm happy to send the details and include them in the notes. But my point is that, and why being plan agnostic is, I think, powerful, is something that and this is a segue, something I believe in, is that nutrition is individualized. Right? Absolutely. It really needs to be individualized, because we all need different things. And that's why we're using that term again, plan agnostic, because what works for me may not work for you, and certainly won't work for some of the members that work with us as a result of their unique dietary needs, and so on and so forth. So I think that's another important thing to share. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And when it comes to vulnerability, that may be where people think, well, I'm weird, or I'm different, or another thing that we've dealt with is not just food sensitivities, but I would say I've also worked with people who have, and you may remember, food, it's not preferences, but
aversions
and sensory issues.
Yes.
So sensory issues with certain foods and certain flavors. And so that's usually where I refer to occupational therapy. And some people think occupational therapy is just for kids, but actually that's really, really important for individuals who have not just sensitivities, but food aversions, and have palate differentiators. And there are, that does relate to psychology. It's a little different, yet that's something that's important. And it's important to address, because there are individuals that like say only want certain processed foods, or they say, oh, chicken feels funny in my mouth. And so how this comes back to vulnerability is, you are who you are, and can you be open enough to share who you are, yet the fear of, am I going to be accepted for what I bring to the table, is sometimes what stops people. What are your thoughts? Absolutely.
And it is what stops people. And a lot of times they've got a past experience with it. They've, expressed something to somebody, and then that person has passed judgment on them, and they have felt judged. So they shut down, they build walls. And it's, how do you live in this lifestyle post surgery, post weight loss, wherever.
Post GLP-1. Yeah.
Whichever one. And it could be a combination of them all, right? Because it's a non-judgment zone. And so creating a space for those to come in and feel okay to talk about what they're feeling and what they're thinking, and how they're feeling and thinking about foods, and knowing that you may not have a eating disorder, but you may have disordered eating. And that is, that is something that we talk about as well. And we want to, I'd love to delve into that at some other point too, to kind of distinguish between the two, and how to overcome some of those things. So right now, the focus is how do you overcome, being vulnerable in groups of people. You have to pick the group of people or those people that are walking the same walk that you're walking. Yeah. And finding a connection with them, whether it be this group, whether it be other, groups, you've got to find a connection so that you can open up and then you can work. And then once I think you've opened up, then that's where the work becomes really important. And you start doing the legwork that needs to be done so that you can live the best life that you can live.
Yeah. Yeah. I pulled up some stuff, as you know, before we started recording. And there were a couple things that I thought were really fascinating. You know that we do a lot of nervous system work, nervous system regulation, nervous system for capacity. Yep. And I have a couple different things why vulnerability feels so damn hard, right? So number one, protection mode is primal. Protection mode is primal. So the nervous system, your nervous system, which is hardwired for fear, friends, it's not hardwired for happiness, hardwired for fear, right? Which means our nervous system is attempting to protect us, right? So when we always in fight flight, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a coaching circle, if it's a support group, right? Or if it's the lion's den, right? Yep. If it senses threat, there's the potential of that shutdown to go into protection mode, right? So many of us learned early on that vulnerability equals danger. Vulnerability equals danger. So there could be this pattern, which I call turtling, hermiting, vanishing, right? You become invisible, right? It's almost like go gadget invisibility cloak, right? It's not weakness. It's a survival strategy. And yet it's important to recognize when you do this, not to push yourself out of protection mode. It is to recognize, oh, dear self, you're in protection mode. What would feel safe? Where and what can I do in this moment so that I can access help? And that's another thing, the hyper independence that a lot of people have as part of their coping mechanism. People pleasers, right? Sometimes it's that codependency wound, and sometimes it's a trauma response too. I have to be hyper independent. I can't ask for help, right? And that could be related to that protection mode, because if I have to ask for help, there could be some mindset stuff there. If I have to ask for help, there must be something wrong with me because I am fiercely independent. No, friend, you're human. You're human. We're all human. And a lot of us in our community are fiercely independent and also carry that wounding because that's what we had to do as part of that protection mode, right? As part of that. So just notice that. And then what can I do? What would help me to build a bridge so that it feels safe to ask for help and to be vulnerable in that space? These are some really good questions that you can ask yourself and to start to, as we use in our community, get ready to get to the point where you have the willingness to jump in. And then the second one is shame makes you think that you're the only one. So shame says, if they knew what you've done, what you eat when nobody's looking, how you eat, how much you've eaten, they're gonna shake that finger at you. They're gonna tell you. I remember a couple sessions ago, I had a woman come on to our call and she said, I've been eating at night and I don't want you to chew me out. I'm really scared you're going to chew me out. I was like, and it was my first interaction with her. And I was like, why would you ever think that I would chew you out or that that I would, fuss at you or yell at you. Like, absolutely not. And yet the voice of shame, and it could be that what parents have said, or what your own internal voice says, that shame voice, or maybe you've heard it from other people's, and maybe even at some point medical providers, where I know the medical community is really working to change that, right? Because there is a lot of weight and obesity stigma in medical communities. So shame creates this sense of being quiet, and the silence feeds the shame. The cycle continues until you break that cycle and speak out loud and build that relationship with vulnerability to share with people. This is it. Okay. And I may have said 4, but I have 3. So there's a vulnerability, or the other part of vulnerability that feels so damn hard is the fear of being seen and not held. It kind of reminds me of those jokes back in the day where, and I'm not a big person who watches The Office, but my husband loves that show. And I think that when I think of The Office, I could see this happening, where it's like they do these team building exercises, right? And again, I've never seen this on The Office, but I can see them doing something like this because it would be funny. It's like, okay, fall backwards, and then nobody's standing there, and you like land and you just fall on the ground. And that, I think, is what people are afraid of, is that being vulnerable is allowing yourself to lean into the fall, expecting to be held and fearing that you won't be held. And what if they judge you? And what if they don't get it? And what if they can't hold space for that? And what if you were just a freak weirdo? Because I think we all think that we're unicorns and freaks and weirdos. And I have this problem that nobody else will understand. It is so freakish that all of this fear often stems from wounds and invalidation that makes group sharing or any kind of support group sharing feel risky. And even when I go to the hospitals, because I do visit hospital groups and give talks, those groups are very shallow. They don't go into this stuff. And usually when I share stuff like this, the room, they just start to, like, their eyes get all wide, like, somebody gonna say something? Like, it's just so weird because I'm so comfortable talking about these things. Like, and they're just like, did you just hear what she said? Like, she said shame and vulnerability. Like, it's almost like a ventriloquist almost. But we got to make light of it, because it reminds me of when Brene Brown, and I've listened to so many of her books, so I don't know if it was in a talk or a book, where she said, and I'm on a plane and people say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a shame researcher. And then they go, oh, and they turn and they can't even like talk to her because they're like, oh no, we're not unpacking that. So, and I guess the last one, as I may have said, I said 4, then I said 3 is really, all of this is about willingness, right? So readiness, this, it isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing. What are we willing to share? What are we willing to connect with? And sometimes, and I can't remember if you said this, since we've been live or before, but that dipping your toe in the water and then it's almost like you're the hokey pokey, right? I dip my left toe in, I pull my left toe out, like it, but it's all about protection, I think. And then there's part of this is also, and I've heard people say this, I'm struggling. I don't want to be a burden. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, I don't want to be a burden, and I should have figured this out by now, and nobody will get
it. That's not allowing ourselves to claim the space that we occupy in the world. We are human beings having, these experiences, and some of them are garden variety experiences, and some of them are, off the charts wacko experiences. And it's just being willing to share even little bits of it. I think that it has to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere if we want to overcome some of these issues that we have with food, with movement, with really, it boils down to, I say food movement, but it all is under the umbrella of self-care. Because when we are caring for ourselves, we are being honest with the choices that we're making, and we're taking ownership of the good choices and the not so great choices. And living with the consequences of the not so great choices, but also living with the, the benefits of the great choices. So it's the balancing act. And it is, and we talked about this on the last, podcast about, we get into this diet mentality where we have to be 100% all the time. That's unrealistic. And we need to live in a lifestyle that is conducive to living. And it isn't 100% great all the time. It's living in, an 80-20 or a 70-30 or sometimes it's a 50-50. Of whatever that looks like. And that takes being able to look at ourselves and being vulnerable to ourselves first as well, and asking those really hard questions of ourselves. Is, when you sit down and, if you're going to track, right? If you sit down and start tracking, you got to be vulnerable and honest with yourself and say, all right, what did I put in my mouth? How much movement did I actually get? Am I tracking my steps? Am I only getting 3,000 steps a day when I should shoot more for? And I understand that number is really arbitrary when it comes to movement, but sometimes it's a good starting point for data. I mean, I've gotten to the place where I don't track my steps anymore because they don't really matter. It's the quality and the quantity of my movement that's important for my mental health. And then when my mental health is in good shape, my physical health follows. And that is what I work on. And sometimes it's not steps at all. Sometimes it's laying on the ground and stretching. That's not being picked up by my Fitbit. But I understand that data. And sometimes people have to really be broken down in the beginning when they're just starting to be vulnerable with themselves of looking at it that way too, that it's not all, we get hammered in our head, 10,000 steps, hammered in our head, move. But sometimes it's the slowing down that does some of the healing as well.
Yeah. Rest is just as important. And, as you were talking, I know that we have, there are a lot of folks who in our community, in the entire community, the weight loss community, right? That are anti-tracking, or that fear tracking as a result of judgment and criticism. And so when we suspend judgment, again, that's something to work through. And when we can be vulnerable and honest and truthful with ourselves to say, yeah, I had Girl Scout cookies and they were good and I liked them. And it's different than I can't believe I did this, right? And there's a whole lot of judgment, criticism, and shame. And I think it's also where then we're giving our power away to food, and recognizing that we often have the power to make a conscious choice. And yet there is that automatic belief, well, I didn't have a choice. Or when we're on automatic pilot, we act before we think instead of thinking before we act.
Yep.
And then there's this, I can't believe I did it. There's judgment, criticism. And even then, what's important to recognize is sometimes that's as a result of a dissociation, or you're not connected to your body. You're on autopilot. And to really create change, you do need to slow down. Right. And that's a practice. And that's not necessarily what today's episode is about. But we also need to be vulnerable with ourselves to have the conversation inside of our head or with ourselves, or to be patient enough to say, wow, there's some learning that I need to do. And yet we don't go to, wow, I need to learn some things. We go immediately to blame, shame, guilt, and punishment.
Yeah. And that is old. And that's old. And that's so many of us, that comes from, that childhood. and we can go back into what all triggers are. You know, we kind of tapped in a little bit at the last podcast about that, but this brings up something that is, when you were talking about shame, it reminded me of a post that I did on one of your Facebook groups that quoted one of the books that you wrote. And this is, you know, one of those crazy little plugs for your book, but it comes up, and I just want to, you know, say that, because it literally triggered this for me. It said, instead of feeling shame or sadness for having fallen, recognize that you only succeed by continuing to try, and that the only failure is the result of quitting, not the result of trying. And that is from her Release Your Regain. It is so important that people understand that if you don't try, you can't succeed. And in trying, there is failure. And that is being vulnerable by putting yourself in situations where you're not going to be successful every single time. And that is okay. I believe the society that we have lived in and grown up in, and many of us said that failure is unacceptable. And so when we walk into this post-bariatric surgery world, or post-GLP-1, whatever, however you've gotten to this podcast, we have come here with such wounding that said that we have failed over and over and over again. And that part of us needs to be healed. And that starts by doing some of this really difficult work and becoming vulnerable with each other and talking about what's going on.
Right, right.
The food isn't the enemy. The enemy is our feelings and thoughts around food.
Absolutely. And the other things that may drive us towards self-soothing in a way that is also self-harming.
Yes.
Right? It's how we're coping. And it's what's driving us to food. I think a lot of times we've made food the problem or the enemy. And food is an inanimate object. It's, you know, that's why I have said, you know, this is about your relationship with food and your relationship with yourself, because your interactions with food, they're you and you. Food is an inanimate object. Your relationship with yourself, your emotions, thoughts, feelings, nervous system is what is, you know, moving you toward and away certain foods. And it's where some people will put certain foods on a pedestal. And that was something that I learned, you know, I didn't learn it until after surgery. I had foods on a pedestal. There were foods that were like, oh, this is bad, this is good. You know, we have all those things. Oh, I had a good day, right? It was determined by our eating. I had a bad day. I was bad today, right? Which then shames us. And so the language is also important in how we talk about food and how we talk about ourselves. And that also leaves us vulnerable because there's judgment, criticism in how we see ourselves. You're not bad for eating a cupcake. Like it's a lot of moral judgment. You're not bad because you gained 5 pounds, right? There's a lot of factors, and you and I know, and we can, you know, share that with others that play into that. It's not just about a cupcake. There's a lot more that goes on in that. And yet when we are willing to be vulnerable with ourselves about the emotional hurts, about the things that are going on in life, where, you know, and, you know, it could be, these are things that I've talked about in books and emails and in a lot of different places. It's, you know, let's say, and now I'm making stuff up, but these are things that are, oh gosh, I had a parent that passed away. So grief is a big one, where, or there may be grief that comes up that may not necessarily bring about shame, but what will bring about shame is I didn't know how to handle that grief. And now I'm dealing with regain, ... shame. And then there's, you know, an ADHD diagnosis or menopause. I'm a whole lot more squirrely. And now I don't know, you know, I thought I had it under control because that's the word that people use. And now I've had this regain and I have this shame as a result of the regain. So sometimes there's that shame and regain go hand in hand, or I never got to goal. And there's shame and an issue with how can I be vulnerable? Or it could be sharing the desires for certain foods. There can be shame, blame, or guilt. Like, I shouldn't have these feelings. I shouldn't want chicken fingers and fries so much. Still, like, why? And that can be something that makes somebody feel like an alien, and they're not. It's like, yeah, let's work with that. Let's lean into that. And we can do, there is a lot of there are things we can do that people
Absolutely.
don't even realize in terms of rewiring and things like that, and experiencing food differently. And but there could be, I was cheated on, or because that can bring about shame.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of life experiences that can bring about that. But I love that you mentioned that rewiring, because that's what this really is. And we talk about mindset shifting. I mean, I'm going to, dumb it down as, because that's kind of where I come from. I'm not, I don't have the expertise other than experience, but it's when we're thinking about how we thought about, or how I thought about, seeking pleasure through food prior to surgery. That's all I knew. Once I had surgery and realized there needed to be a shift in my thinking around it, I realized I can rewire the way I feel and think about, why am I craving chicken fingers and French fries all the time? Okay, what can I now put in that place? What can bring me just as much comfort and joy that isn't highly palatable foods, and some of it can be food related. Some of it could be, substitution of other types of foods that are healthier choices for me, or it could be an action. It could be, or an inaction. Right. Wow, I'm not hungry. I'm really not craving those foods. What I'm craving is rest. I'm craving peace. I'm craving serenity. But I can't do that if I'm, numbing myself with food. I thought about something that, when we talk about being vulnerable, and we talk about, when we're vulnerable, a lot of times the reason why we aren't vulnerable is because it brings up shame, right? And judgment, because I think that shame and judgment go hand in hand. And, shame, it's a negative emotion that really comes from our negative self-talk. That's what shame, to me, kind of the Francis definition, right? Shame is that negative self-talk that we're constantly doing for ourselves. So how can we be vulnerable to others if we're not even allowing ourselves to be honest and loving and caring in our own head? So it's kind of this.
Right. And when it comes to judgment, one of the activities, and I'm happy to share it here. One of the activities that I've done in our group before is I've asked people, as kind of like an icebreaker, and usually people are silent, is, how frequently are you judgmental of others? So I will give them an activity, like, I want you to go, walk when you're out and about today at the grocery store. I want you to notice if your judgment of that lady who's wearing a tube top, or I want you to notice if you're judgmental of different people's bathing suit attire at the beach when you go, or at the pool, if you have one where you live. When you are able to work through judgment of others, it also helps for you to suspend judgment of yourself. And so one of the reasons that I suspect, and this is not in any of the notes that I took, this is just a riffing episode here. This is just like on the fly, intuitive, is when you are super judgy of others, you are then assuming that that is also how other people think. Mm-hmm. And that they will be super judgmental of you. So what we do in a way is kind of like, we do a little bit of a judgment detox, right? Where we detox your judgment, not just of yourself, because we want it to start with self. But the easiest place for it to start is, how can you be less judgmental of that person in a restaurant who has 3 plates of food in front of them, right?
Absolutely.
And not look, because when, one of the things, and I'll share this somewhere separately, I may even read it, is 2 or 3 years ago, I had written this little memo called implicit weight bias. Our implicit weight bias against other people is what's keeping us stuck sometimes, and also what keeps us in judgment of others and in judgment of ourselves. Is we carry around society's weight bias towards ourselves in addition to others. So we're keeping the cycle of diet mentality and all of that BS weight bias, because we're afraid to be vulnerable, because this is like, I feel like I'm on a sermon, like we're holding the same judgment that shows up for ourselves. We're holding it against other people. Did you see what she was eating? Did you see what she was wearing? Oh my gosh, the cellulite. Like, do you hear yourself? Like, of course you're not going to wear whatever out, because you're not just judging yourself, you're judging others. And it's not about shaming anybody for judging. It's by bringing back the awareness. If I have the capacity to judge, oh my gosh, what am I doing inside my own head? So I've said this in many places, but like, I don't know if folks have heard it. So sometimes, you have to repeat things multiple times. We don't have a filter inside of our head. So I wouldn't say to anyone, oh my gosh, what happened to your face? Like, or what happened to your hair? Or, did you get a haircut? Like, we wouldn't say things like, are you wearing that? Yet, because we have a filter, we have this filter of external communication. Yet, when it comes to self-talk, there is no filter. So the way that we talk to ourselves is violent. It's volatile. It's vitriol.
Yes.
It's awful. It's horrific. And it's painful. It's hurtful. And we believe it as though it's gospel. We believe it like it's automatic belief. And that's the thing, that if I can drop any truth bomb right now, do not believe everything you think, question it. And is it, we've all heard this. Is it kind? Is it loving? Is it helpful? And yet people equate compassion. I wrote about this in Bariatric Mindset Success. Compassion is not indulgence. Compassion is not ice cream. Compassion is not, I deserve this. Compassion is the kindness. And Dr. Kristen Neff, who I think works somewhere in Texas, could be the University of Austin, I can't remember. She has a whole lot of stuff on compassion. And I quote her frequently, because compassion is needed. Compassion is not weakness. Vulnerability is not weakness. Compassion is the ability to be kind to other human beings and to give ourselves self-compassion, to give ourselves the same kindness that we would show to others. And vulnerability is the ability, is courage, and is the ability to tear down those walls and say, I'm here to be seen, to work on myself, to grow. And it takes courage to say, I'm being vulnerable, not there's something wrong with me. That's the old BS. No. It's to say, I'm here. I'm a flawed human being like you. And the perfectionist may really struggle with that. I'm a flawed human being just like you. And I'm flawed. I'm flawed. Like, I come as flawed as they come. And to say, I'm still growing, and we're growing together. And that, I think, is where vulnerability and being able to lean into that can help us to grow and to be seen and to be heard and to be held, and to know that we will be caught and that we will hold each other. And that's where I think everybody needs to find a community. It does not have to be mine, folks. I love my community. Francis is part of my community, but it does not have to be mine. Go where you feel held. Go where you feel lifted up. Go where you feel your strengths are honored and your weaknesses, or what we call less conditioned parts, are strengthened. Go there, wherever that is for you. Does not have to be with me and or us. That is where I think, go where you feel you're lifted up, you're valued, you're reinforced for being who you are. And that's something, it's funny because we had a call yesterday and we were talking about being authentic and being aligned. And something that I had brought up in a couple previous groups is going back to Brene Brown. It all ties in. I didn't know I was going to talk about Brene today, all right? But belonging. And a lot of people say, I feel weird. And I'm like, come in, let your freak flag fly, bring it here. Because that's another part of fearing being vulnerable, is the feeling that I don't belong. Well, what creates that? Is it greater society? Is it our self-talk? To what you just said, is it our self-talk, or is it something else? Is it a feeling we get? And a member of ours said, I feel that I don't belong. And this is so pivotal, because I know you weren't on the call, so I want to share this with you and our audience and everybody. She said, well, I've seen these women that are in cliques. And so I've just felt that I'm different, that I don't belong. So it was a belief activity that we were doing. And she said, I feel like I don't belong. And I said, well, where did that message originally come from, that you don't belong? Was it in their behavior? Is it, they know each other? And she said, well, maybe it was my self-talk. I was saying I'm different. I don't belong. They already know each other. And I said, so maybe you needed the courage to break the ice. She said, well, I just recognized that that's when I would, pull back and slink away. And that's when I would eat. And I said, so you determined you didn't belong. It wasn't a rejection. They didn't reject you. They didn't know you. You didn't know them. And neither the group, the cliquey people, or you made the move to say, hey, to break the ice, to say, I want to get to know you or anything. And that was where you made the automatic assumption, zero judgment, but you made the assumption that I don't belong. And then she said, and I didn't even make the connection until this moment, that my fear of rejection created my sense of not belonging. And that then to go quiet that noise in my head, not food noise, but that yearning to belong, was to go eat. And then after, I would enter a shame cycle.
And that right there, that last, 60 seconds of what you said, is how people don't become vulnerable because of that cycle. Exactly. There's an assumption that's made about a situation. That person made a judgment about
create a story in their head.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our head is a dangerous place to be. And when you created this story, this narrative that was false, based on nothing other than they were comfortable with each other because they knew each other. And then the feeling that she had, which was uncomfortable or whatever that is, then drove the rest of the narrative, which is, let me just go over here and eat because I don't want to be uncomfortable. I need to numb that out. And so I think that happens over and over and over and over again in our daily lives. And that's how we end up in these situations where we're using food to numb all feelings, not just the big ones, but all of them. And post-surgery for a lot of people, and now we're looking at a lot of, post-GLP-1 patients or patients that have lost a lot of weight on GLP-1s. It's like, well, why am I still overeating or looking for food all the time? And what does that look like? Why am I constantly grabbing for this and grabbing for that without even really being conscious of it? It's because we have trained ourselves that any feeling must be numbed. Happy, sad, glad, whatever the feeling may be. And that's the rewiring that you were mentioning earlier. But we've got to get vulnerable enough to have the conversations that this client had with you yesterday. Find a space.
In a group setting in front of other women.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful because we were able to hold space for her, and she was able to see it and to recognize it. And then others were able to, also say, oh my gosh, that's wild and interesting. And then to also share where, how they approach groups. And it wasn't even about our group. It was just about noticing where our beliefs keep us stuck. That was what the topic was, right? Our beliefs and limiting beliefs. And so it was a segue into, it was a great segue into vulnerability. And again, bringing up Brene Brown, but one of the things she says is you cannot selectively numb emotions. If you numb, the sadness, the fear, you're going to also numb joy. And what we see frequently, and I see in the entire weight loss community, is holy crap, I cannot hold space for joy or happiness or elation or really excited, passionate experiences, because I'm afraid, I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, because there is an expectation of negative things, because we have programmed ourselves or had conditioning or experiences that are, let's say, we pay attention to the negative. And we've heard the saying, it takes 5 positives thoughts to outweigh a negative thought. And so when you're swimming, let's say, in the negative, how can I possibly hold a positive? Because this isn't going to last long. And so then they fear it. They don't have even the nervous system capacity to hold space for it. And here's another powerful one. And I know we've probably gone way, way over time, but I want to share this. Is we have a member, and I remember her saying, I think I'm afraid to lose weight again because I'm afraid something bad is going to happen. Yeah. And so I remember listening to NPR a while back and listening to, I can't remember who she was, but she was I don't think it was Lindsey Vonn. I think it may have been another skier. I know this woman was a skier. She was in the Olympics, and I cannot remember who it was, but it was on the radio when I got in the car to take my son to school a couple of years ago. And she said, somebody was asking her about winning a medal, an Olympic medal. And this plays back to the client and vulnerability. And she said, well, I'm really scared because the last time I won or came close to winning, her grandmother passed away, and her dad, I think, had a head injury or something really awful happened to him. And it came at the same time when she had this horrible, or when she had won a medal or had won a significant racing event. And she said this, and I instantly was like, that's programming. When we have a traumatic event that coincides with something else. So there can be, let's say, people who have had a history of trauma. When I lose weight, I will be targeted again. That could be part of their fear-based pattern. Losing weight equates vulnerability. There could be that. It could be, oh gosh, the last time I weighed 150 pounds, XYZ happened with something in their life. Like it could be a job loss or a divorce, or somebody died, or somebody got really sick, and so people then anchor unconsciously, right? They have these patterns in their brain that then if this, then that.
Yep.
And so we have to repattern those things. And this was something, and we'd been working together, 6-8 months at this point. And her eyes, I remember her saying that, she had like stroke or an aneurysm. There was something major that happened, and with her health. And she was like, I'm afraid that if I get down here, that's going to happen again. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have to rewire this like now. And it has been helpful because she has lost weight and she feels safer doing it because we've rewired. When the body doesn't feel safe, it holds on to things. And this is not, I'm not bullshitting you guys. Like this is our brain and our body is protective. If we feel that losing weight is going to put us at a vulnerability, that's one way to be vulnerable. If we're terrified to share our truth, then safety, nervous system patterns must come first. We've got to, because protection is what, the wall goes up. So being vulnerable, we need to, it can feel dangerous. So how do we engage vulnerability in a way that guides us towards growth, towards belonging, towards healing, that is inclusive of all of these things, and also recognizing that without being vulnerable somewhere, could be in your therapist's office, right? It could be with one person, but that vulnerability is important to get to the truth that you may have under wraps that needs to be exposed, maybe even just to yourself, to create that healing pattern.
To create the space for you to be in the growth mindset. I mean, because I think is really, if I were to have any closing remark, right? Vulnerability equals growth. And when we are vulnerable with ourselves, we're vulnerable with, those that we're working with, whether it be, a coach or a therapist or a spouse, or
even a support group.
A support group, a safe place to be vulnerable. It puts us into a growth mindset. And I know you're going to have a podcast about the fixed and the growth mindset. So I don't want to go into too far with that, but that's where the growing happens. It doesn't happen when we're stuck. So we have to get vulnerable to grow, to move on in our lives.
Right. So, and my closing remarks are this. So it's almost like it's a journaling prompt or a little thought pattern that people can have to take with them is, think about this. What are you afraid might happen if you were truly vulnerable in a group setting, right? What are you afraid might happen if you were truly vulnerable in a group setting? We said it earlier, choosing the right setting is first and foremost, right? You want to feel safe. You want to feel protected. You want to feel held. That's important. And what might become possible if you let yourself be supported instead of silencing yourself? What might become possible for you if you let yourself be supported by others, by a community, instead of self-silencing? What could be possible for you? What are you afraid that might happen if you were truly vulnerable? And what might be possible if you allowed yourself to be supported? So I'm really excited that you guys all tuned in today. I hope that this supported you. I hope that you are able to have some takeaways to be more vulnerable wherever you go, and find a safe space that you can be held and supported and guided and nurtured. We all deserve that. And if you have any other questions, you can always reach out at support@bariatricmindset.com, where you can get in touch with me, and you can always check out the website bariatricmindsetsuccess.com. And we do have a Facebook group, which we manage. I know Frances is in there a lot. I'm in there a lot. Our free Facebook group, the Bariatric Mindset Mavens. And I'll make sure that all of those links are in the show notes so that you have access. And we keep that a pretty safe space. If anybody gets a little, disrespectful, which that's never happened. And I think that that's because of the spaces that we create is, we really set it with intention. And that's another thing. So set the intention that where you go to be vulnerable, that you will be held and honored and heard and supported. And I think that's important. So thanks again for listening in. Thank you, Frances, for co-hosting with me. It's always a pleasure to share and bounce ideas. So I'm really glad that that you joined me again today. And any final thoughts that you have?
Just, I learned so much from these as well. I mean, there are so many nuggets that, between the two of us talking that I can't wait to go back and listen to as well, because this is part of my growth, right? It's being able to put out there and be vulnerable enough to share my story and listen to your story and hold space for others. So this is just, I totally enjoy it and I appreciate being here. Absolutely.
I'm so
Until
excited.
next time, right?
Yes. Until next time, everyone, lots of love, and we'll catch you in the next episode. All right. Bye.